I had the absolute honor of reading Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. When I first read this book, that is undoubtedly a map of self-exploration and the understanding of humanity and all our emotions, the theme of the book was especially clear. Vulnerability is our superpower. All 2023, I've been struggling with grasping the beauty of vulnerability. Things like trauma, frustration, pain, heartbreak, grief, loss, mourning, and every other word that you can think of that perfectly describes the pain of losing someone close to you, or the pain of losing yourself in the midst of everything going on in this world, is what I felt. I struggled in every ebb and flow of trauma, of stress, of burnout, with being vulnerable about what I really felt. Vulnerable about what I really saw, and especially vulnerable about how I felt regarding myself. When I think about vulnerability, it's more than just opening up. In fact, when I think about vulnerability, I think about love and spaces to belong. When Brene Brown talks about love, she says, quote, "We cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known, and when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. Love is not something we give or get. It is something that we nurture and grow. A connection that can be cultivated between two people only when it exists within each one of them. We can love others only as much as we love ourselves. Shame, blame, disrespect, betrayal, and the withholding of affection damage the roots from which love grows. Love can survive these injuries only if they are acknowledged, healed, and rare. Love is a place we go when the heart is open." So when I was reading this book, it was over the period of Thanksgiving, and especially the Thanksgiving break. When I was in the kitchen with my parents, I constantly thought about all the work that goes into preparing a meal in love. A day before, my mother was prepping the food, and the day of, it was conversations and FaceTime calls with other family members. But overall, it was a space of belonging. It was vulnerable conversations that we hadn't had all year long, happening at a kitchen table, cutting up macaroni bites or cutting up pieces of cheese to throw into the macaroni. Conversations of vulnerability that came with rolled dough and making apple turnovers for the family. It was vulnerability and having the conversations on and off camera when we didn't look our best in our pajamas making food that we would soon enjoy later. It was vulnerability that made that entire space feel safe. It wasn't the day. It wasn't the location. It wasn't the food. It was the people. It was the commitment. It was the shared space. It was the desire to be open, knowing that someone was safe. When I thought about the day of Thanksgiving, my heart was postured to a place of thankfulness. Of course, you say it's Thanksgiving. Of course, you will be thankful. But for me, it spoke to what Brene Brown talks about when she speaks about belonging. She speaks about belonging as being a spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. Brene says that true belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. When I read this, it put a lot of things into perspective. Do we know who we are? And do we allow ourselves to know and belong within ourselves? I started thinking because when I started off 2023, I really thought I knew myself. But as grief settled in, and trauma and stress, I pushed away any aspect of joy because I felt like I didn't belong to happiness, to peace, to breakthrough. Instead, I felt enslaved to shame and disrespect and anger and frustration and grieving. The truth is that on the other side of belonging, on the other side of vulnerability, we are entering sacred spaces not just with others, but within ourselves. Atlas of the Heart is not simply a book to preach to others about how to understand the human mind, heart, and body. Atlas of the Heart is a map that directs every human being back to ourselves. Not just why do we think the way that we do, but why do we extend to others the grace that should be within ourselves first? Atlas of the Heart, a redirection of our mind to look at all the things and paths that we have not crossed, and to instead reflect on how we have come so far. Atlas of the Heart, that has an X marks the spot wherever we have crossed a path or area of trauma, and instead of running from it, we revisit it to remember how much space we really need to belong and not fake it. Atlas of the Heart is undoubtedly the epitome of the human emotions, but the permission to simply be. Brené Brown says that in our saddest moments, we want to be held by or feel connected to someone who has known that same ache, even if what caused it is completely different. We don't want our sadness overlooked or diminished by someone who can't tolerate the way we're feeling because they're unwilling or unable to tolerate their own sadness. In our saddest moments, in our most vulnerable moments, in our most scary moments, may we remember how much we truly do belong in this space and in the others. Atlas of the Heart reminds me that when the winds and movements of life knock me off balance and knock others around me off balance, that it is not something to be bewildered by. Instead, it is something to be embraced. There's a sacredness of the wind, in the same way there's a sacredness of recognizing how I feel, when I feel, what I feel. There's a beauty in our being, in our allowing ourselves to be who God has called us to be, and then to allow others to be who they believe God has called them to be. Atlas of the Heart is a redirection back to the person that we loved all along, but could not really see in the mirror because life fogged the reflection. I, like you, deserve these belonging spaces. I, like you, can be free through the lens of vulnerability. I, like you, believe that love can be so sacred, so sacrificial, and so healing that not even a doctor could prescribe the right medicine to perfectly fill every hole and gap that we've had in our lives. Atlas of the Heart is the epitome of this. A reading dedicated to those who are not just storytellers, but those who believe in the sacredness of our being. I, like you, deserve to always have a map that brings me back home, the home within my heart, and the home within this world.